very lovely to be back. It's quite loud and amongst you. So most people know that at the moment my job is driving tour buses, and I thoroughly enjoy driving up and down the countryside, telling people all about Wallace and Bruce and Bonnie Prince Charlie and all the sort of mythical stones and excitement that we have. This past week, I have 4 times now done the same tour, which is a little wearing, I have to admit, but we go up to Loch Ness. And of course, when we're driving up to Loch Ness, we have to talk about Nessie. And I tell people, before I start the story, I ask people if they could put their hand up if they believe in the Loch Ness Monster. And you always get a very varied sort of response. Some people are like, oh yes, absolutely. And people, no, not at all. And then I tell them about all the potential evidences for Nessie. And then at the end, I ask them if I changed anyone's mind. And I've been doing tour buses for a number of years. And so far, I've never had anyone say they've changed their mind. But that's okay. Maybe they're just not brave enough to do it. I don't know. Maybe I'm just rubbish at telling people about it. Maybe I'm not convincing enough. I don't know. But what I'd like to do today is I'd like to look at evidence for something historical. Now, we quite often sing a hymn that goes, Christ Jesus lives today. You ask me how I know he lives. He lives within my heart is kind of the idea. And personal experience can be a very useful form of evidence. If I've seen something with my own eyes, I'm quite likely to believe the senses that I have, that they've been reliable thus far in life. I expect them to continue to be reliable. But if there's something that happened before I was born, I don't have my own senses, my own experience to test. I'm maybe not going to rely on somebody that I don't know very well. If I meet somebody in the street and they said, oh, I saw a UFO, I'm going to be a little less confident in their word than I would of somebody who I could respect. And so not all evidence is created equal. So the point I'm making. Some evidence is useful, some evidence is not so useful. Some evidence points to things that are of little value. You know, whether or not somebody saw a UFO doesn't really change my life any. But there are some things that do impact my life and might impact yours as well. The thing I'm going to look at is the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. Why do I want to look at that specifically? Well, if we were to read 1 Corinthians chapter 15 and verses 17 to 19, we would see there that Paul says, and if Christ is not risen, your faith is futile. You're still in your sins. Then also those who have fallen asleep in Christ have perished. If in this life only we have hope in Christ, we are of all men most miserable. The resurrection of Jesus Christ, guys, is probably the most important event in all human history. The claims that Christ made about the reason he came down to earth, the reason he lived, the reason he died, what that means, they all stand or fall with the truth of the resurrection. If Christ did not rise from the dead, he did not die in your place for your sins. That's the message of the Bible. We have sinned. We deserve punishment because of that. Christ died to take our punishment, and he was raised again as evidence that that payment was fully accepted. If Christ is not raised again, we have no hope. And there is no hope then for all of humanity. So what I'd like to do is look at 5 facts. And I think if you were to look carefully at these 5 facts, weigh them up in your mind, you will come to the certainty that Christ is risen again. Now, these facts are not controversial. I could pull lots and lots of facts for the evidence of Jesus and his death and burial and his resurrection. But some of them are debated by historical scholars. These 5 facts are not debated by historical scholars. Even people who are ardent atheists, who will say there is no such thing as God, there is no such thing as miracles, Jesus may have lived, but he was not God. Even these people will agree on these 5 facts. Okay, so these are, I'm not bringing in things that people say, oh, well, that's not true, that's not true. This is undeniable by historical standards. So the 5 facts are this. First, that Jesus died by crucifixion. Secondly, that ladies found the tomb empty. Thirdly, independent appearances of Jesus alive after his death. Fourth, the violence endured by the apostles. And finally, enemies of Christ converted. Now, I'm going to get Fraser very excited in a moment, because if you take those things, you can actually make it a little acrostic. Okay, so if you put a death by crucifixion, you get an A. Then ladies finding the empty tomb, that's an L. Then you've got independent appearances, that's an I. V for violence, endured by the apostles, and then E for enemies of Christ, you get alive, which works quite well when you're talking about a crucifixion, isn't it? Not my work, somebody else's work. I stole that from somebody else, so don't get too excited. So the first uncontroversial fact is the crucifixion of Jesus. Now, we know that he was crucified by the Romans, and a lot of people attribute crucifixion to the Romans because they kind of made it very popular. They took it and popularized it, but it actually was developed by the Persians, but the Romans made it, I don't want to use the word better, but more effective for their aims. Crucifixion was a form of execution that was deliberately designed to terrorize their enemies. What they did was they nailed people through the hands, and the Greek and Hebrew word for hand that was used in the Bible actually refers from the tip of your finger to your elbow. We don't really have a word for that. Maybe cubit would be the closest word, but it doesn't mean just the palm of your hand. So most historians will agree that it went in at your wrist and crushed the median nerve, which, if you're like me, you always try to find people's pressure points when you're a kid and give somebody pain with little effort. That's one of the pressure points. So there's a huge amount of pressure then being put on what is a nerve in your body. They were then nailed through the feet. Now, for a while, this was debated. They said that there was no evidence of crucifixion victims ever being nailed through the ankle or through the foot. However, in 1968, the Israeli Department of Antiquities found an ossuary. An ossuary is a wooden box about yay long. It's the length of the femur, which is the longest bone in the body. And basically, it was a burial box. So they'd bury somebody and then go back later, pull all the bones together, put them in a box, put it on a shelf. And they found a bunch of these. And in one of them, there was a man who had had a 7-inch nail driven through his ankle bone, and his shins had been broken. And if you look at the description of what happened to the crucifixion victims in the Bible, that's what is described. They get nailed hand and feet, and then to speed up the death, they had their bones broken, their shin bones broken. They didn't break Jesus's bones because he was already dead, and they make a special note of that. The Bible records that it has a spear thrust into him and outflowed blood and water. And at the time, that is a detail that was added which doesn't make sense to add, because they didn't know at the time the Bible was written what that was, why there was blood and water came out. Now we know it's probably one of two things. It was either the pericardium sac, which is a water sac around your heart, or it was water in the lungs from the asphyxiation process, which is how crucifixion actually kills you. You basically suffocate. Okay? It's a very unpleasant way of dying, but the fact that outflowed blood and water, the way that crucifixion happened, we can guarantee that Jesus was dead. he died by crucifixion. There is no way that with the description recorded in the Bible and the fact that these were professional soldiers who had perfected the art of torture to death, that Jesus survived this. So we know for a fact that Jesus died by crucifixion. Then he was buried, and this was a solid rock tomb. Okay, there's different ways of burying people. Nowadays, we dig a hole with a machine, drop the body in, fill it back in. That's not how the Jews did it at this time in history. What they did was they carved a hole into a solid rock and then placed the body in there. In front of that was dropped a stone. And the stone was not just any old stone, it was specifically designed for the task. It would sit in a little gutter, it would roll down into place, and it was about 1.5 to 2 tons in weight. So it was not something that was easily moved. Okay, you're talking about the weight of an average car. Okay, so it's not sort of thing you can just pick up and carry off on your own, certainly not quietly. On top of the stone was placed a seal, and this was the Roman seal. Now, you might not know this, but the Romans were sticklers for rules. If you took and tampered with a Roman seal without correct authorization, you were signing your own death warrant. It was a severe punishment that was placed on anybody that had the audacity to interfere with a Roman seal. The Bible also records that there was a Roman guard placed over Jesus's tomb. Now, it doesn't say exactly how many people, but a Roman guard was somewhere between 4 and 16 men. Okay, we would expect it to be higher on that scale. We expect it to be closer to the 16 men because the Roman guard were sent out by the Sanhedrin, who were the powerful political people, religious and political men at the time. So they probably could have made sure there was plenty of people there. And for them, making sure that Roman seal was in place, making sure that guard was in place, was a high priority for them, because they were concerned that somebody was going to come and steal the body of Jesus. And that was a real concern for them. So they were making sure that could not happen. And you're saying, well, Paul, thus far, all you've done is say what the Bible has said, right? And you're a Christian, and therefore you believe the Bible is perfectly true. And you're right, that is how I think of the Bible. However, that's not to say that other people reading the Bible would not come to the same conclusions I've come to if they didn't think it was the inspired word of God. If you were to just take what I've said from the Bible, reading it as a historical document, the same as any other historical document, you would probably come to the same conclusions as I have. But we're not just relying on the Bible for our historical evidence. We also have people like Josephus, who was a Jew. He was very anti-Christian, and he confirmed that Jesus was crucified by Pilate. So he was definitely, we knew he was dead. Tacitus also records this. Now, I actually mentioned Tacitus in my tours each day, because he also records the Battle of Mons Graupus, which happened here in Scotland. It's the first time we sort of read about Scotland in written history. But not only that, and this is one of the key ones, I think, is the Jewish Talmud. Now, many people don't know what the Jewish Talmud is. The Jewish Talmud is basically a recording of, as in a written recording, of all the discussions that the Jewish council had. Okay, so the Jews would get together and they talk about a variety of subjects, and these were recorded. And the Jewish Talmud records that after the crucifixion and after the resurrection of Jesus, people were saying that Jesus has been raised from the dead. And in response to that, the correct Jewish response to that was, the disciples stole the body. Okay, so if Jesus hadn't been crucified, there wouldn't be a body to be stolen. If Jesus' body wasn't buried, there wouldn't be his body to be stolen. If Jesus' body was still in the tomb, unresurrected, they would have produced the body and said, here's the body of Jesus. So they wouldn't have to say it had been stolen, because they could produce a body. So we know for a fact that the crucifixion definitely happened. Okay, so he died by crucifixion. That's number one. Secondly, our ladies found the empty tomb. If we were to read the first 11 verses of Luke chapter 24, it records this event. Now, on the first day of the week, very early in the morning, they and certain other women with them came to the tomb bringing the spices which they had prepared. But when they found the stone rolled away from the tomb, then they went in and did not find the body of the Lord Jesus. And it happened, as they were greatly perplexed by this, that behold, two men stood by them in shining garments. Then, as they were afraid and bowed their faces to the earth, they said to them, "Why do you seek the living among the dead? He is not here, but he is risen. Remember how he spoke to you when he was still in Galilee, saying, 'The Son of Man must be delivered into the hands of sinful men and be crucified, and the third day rise again.' But these words seemed to them an idle tale, and they did not believe them." Now, this is an account where the ladies appear at the tomb expecting to find a dead body. They'd gone to put the spices and the scented things on the body as a sort of mark of respect for that burial preparation that's required by the Jews. And when they found there, instead, they found an empty tomb. And they found an angel that told them that he was risen. They then went back to the other disciples, the other followers of Jesus, and told them what had happened. And the men that they spoke to didn't believe them. Why? Why did they not believe them? Well, it was part to do with that culture. In the culture at the time, women were not considered to be reliable witnesses. So how does that help us? Does it just mean that we can look back in the people of the past and say, aren't they terrible misogynists for not trusting what women say? Well, we could do that, but that's not the point I'm trying to take from it. If you were making up a story that was a fiction, would you add in a detail that was harmful to your story at the time? The fact that the women found the body was problematic for the people at the time. They wanted a man to find the body, or lack thereof. That was better for their story. If they're making it up, it's much better to have somebody like Peter or John finding the body or the empty tomb. That's what you're looking for. In fact, in later writings, you have the Gospel of Peter, which was not written by Peter. We know that for a fact. It was about 100 years after he died. They have an account, and they change the story in order to make it men that find the empty tomb. And they actually see Jesus coming out of the empty tomb. Okay, so they changed the story to make it more palatable for the audience that they were hearing. So the fact that it was women that found the empty tomb is a problem for the time. But for us looking back, it's actually very helpful, because it means that we can see this is not fiction. It's more reliable because it falls under what is known as the criterion of embarrassment, which basically means if I was telling you a fake story about myself, I'd always make myself the hero and I'd do great things. You don't lie and say that you did something silly. Yeah. If you were telling somebody that you did something silly, it's probably because you actually did something silly. So, a death by crucifixion is our A. Ladies find the empty tomb is our L. And then we have I, independent appearances of Jesus. 1 Corinthians chapter 15 and verses 3 to 8 are considered to be the oldest part of our Bible. It is an early Christian creed, an early Christian writing that teaches us about the basis of Christianity. And this is considered to be easily written within 5 years of the death of Christ. Okay, so it's incredibly early. And it says there, "For I delivered to you, first of all, that which I also received, that Christ died for our sins according to the scriptures, and that he was buried, and that he rose again the third day according to the scriptures, and that he was seen by Cephas, that's Peter, then by the 12, and after that he was seen by over 500 brethren at once, of whom the greater part remain to the present, but some have fallen asleep. After that he was seen by James, then by all the apostles. Then last of all, he was seen by me also, as by one born out of due time. So this reads like a creed. It's considered to be the oldest part of our Bible. And as I said, most scholars will agree it was within circulation within 5 years of Jesus' death. So we have a number of accounts in the Bible of people seeing a risen Jesus, of interacting with him. In Matthew chapter 28, verses 8 to 10, it records the female disciples finding Jesus and speaking to him. They saw him and they physically interacted with him. He says, "Don't cling to me," okay, which meant they must have been touching him. It's like, okay, you need to stop touching me now so I can go do other things. Then we have the 10 apostles recorded in Luke chapter 24. And again, they saw and physically interacted with them. And you'll note that it added in a key detail. It said that he physically ate. Okay. Some people might think that's a throwaway comment that was made by the writer, but I think it's quite important. Then he was seen by the 11 apostles. So basically, Thomas has joined them at this point. In John chapter 20, verse 26 to 29. They saw and they physically interacted with Jesus. And then it says, and 500 saw them at once. Okay, why is that important in the creed? Well, it's because you could then go and ask these people. If there's 500 people, you can go and talk to a bunch of them and check and make sure that what they're saying all lines up. Okay? If you were to say, well, yeah, there's 500 people, but they've all moved to China now. It's not as trustworthy as saying there's 500 people in the town that you're living in that you can go and talk to, and they will tell you this is what they saw. This is who they touched. Okay, so it makes sense that you have this variety of different independent appearances of Jesus. And these independent appearances of Jesus are not doubted by historical scholars. They will all say that yes, these people truly believed that they saw and touched a risen Jesus. Okay, now they might try and make other explanations for why they saw and touched it, or why they believe they saw or touched a risen Jesus. But the fact is that these people, these 500 plus the 11, then the 10 before them and the female disciples before that, they all believed truly that this was a real risen Jesus that they interacted with. Then we move on to the V for violence endured by the apostles. You could look at Acts 7 and see the martyrdom of Stephen. And he was willing to go to his death for something that he believed to be true. Now, people say, oh, but people die for something they believe to be true all the time. You can look at, the Twin Towers or the bombings in London or things going on in other countries around the world. But these people, they're not first-hand eyewitnesses of these events. The people that crashed into the Twin Towers never actually met Muhammad. Okay, but the people in the Bible, like Stephen, he saw a risen Jesus. The apostles like Peter and James and John, they suffered incredible amounts of violence and fear and hurt and didn't change their story. If you're making up a story yourself, if you know something to be a lie, you don't die for it. It's easy to die for something if you don't know. You could be confused and get convinced of something that's false. But if you know that it's false, if you haven't seen with your own eyes a risen Jesus, then you wouldn't be willing to die for that claim. If I said, I have seen a risen Jesus, and then somebody says, well, I'm going to kill you if you don't change your mind. If I have seen a risen Jesus, I stand by my claim. If I haven't seen a risen Jesus, I would change my mind perhaps. Okay, so also you will notice that the apostles, before they saw the risen Jesus, we have them recorded as being in the upper room with the door shut, and they were afraid of the Jews. And then this event happens where they see a risen Jesus. And next thing, they're out on the street preaching to thousands of people, thousands of Jews. You see Peter. Before Christ's crucifixion, Peter even denied knowing him. And afterwards, he's telling the people who have just crucified Jesus that it was them who had killed their Messiah. With such bravery, with such strength of character. Why is that strength of character suddenly appearing in Peter? Because he has seen a risen Jesus. They scattered in the garden before his crucifixion. They stood firm in the streets, willing to die afterwards. Something had changed that made them bold. The willingness to die to proclaim this resurrection. What were they going to benefit in telling this lie? They didn't get money. They didn't get power. Not at this stage in church history. What they got was fed to the lions, or crucified, or stoned. Next are E. This is our final fact. Enemies of Jesus were converted. We have James and Jude, who were Jesus's brothers. And in John chapter 7, verse 5, it says, even his brothers did not believe him. So we know that before Christ's crucifixion, Jesus' brothers didn't care that he claimed to be the Messiah. They didn't believe him. Okay, so after the resurrection, they became Christians. So what made them change from, I don't believe my brother is, or my half-brother is the Messiah, to I do believe my half-brother is the Messiah? A crucifixion? The death of your brother? Would that be the reason that you'd suddenly start believing? Or would it be seeing your brother alive after his crucifixion? Now, I think my brother's pretty groovy, but I don't think he's the Messiah. I don't think if somebody was to kill him, I would think he was the Messiah. I think it would take more than that. We also have the example of Saul, who became Paul. He went from being a persecutor of the church. He was a powerful man in the Jewish church. He'd sat at the feet of Gamaliel. He was on the skyrocket career path. He was going to be one of the most powerful men in the land. He murdered Christians. And all of a sudden, he becomes a Christian, willing to suffer shipwreck and beatings and eventual beheading. Why? Because he claims to have seen the risen Christ. So we have our 5 uncontroversial facts: the death by crucifixion, ladies that find the empty tomb, independent appearances of Jesus after his death, violence endured by the apostles, and enemies of Christ converted to Christianity. So we have to then look at the potential explanations for these facts. And so I've pulled out some that are the most commonly used ones. The first one is the swoon theory. For those of you that have seen The Princess Bride, which is a very enjoyable film, I find, it means mostly dead. He was mostly dead. The problem is that doesn't line up with our fact number 1, death by crucifixion. We know Jesus died. Out came blood and water. The Romans knew that he had died. They said Joseph of Arimathea went and asked for his body, and Pontius Pilate went, is he dead already? That's quite quick. And he inquired. He went and got the Roman soldiers to check that he was dead. So that doesn't line up, the swoon theory. It also doesn't line up with fact number 3, independent appearances of Jesus alive after his death. If he was mostly dead, and you saw somebody that had suffered incredible amount of damage, who could barely breathe, who needed a doctor, you wouldn't say, oh, there's the risen Christ. You'd go, wow, that guy survived a lot. You wouldn't think he was the risen Savior. It wouldn't change the way you viewed the world. It wouldn't make you endure violence. It wouldn't make your enemies convert to Christianity. So I'm sorry, the swing theory doesn't make any sense. It doesn't line up with the facts. Then there's one that's called the twin theory. And this one I find just great. There was some other person that looked just like Jesus that was executed. Yeah, maybe he had a twin brother, which is where we get the twin theory from. Somebody that just looked really, really like him. The problem is that the Bible records that during the independent appearances, Thomas put his hand into the wound on Jesus' side, into his hand's wounds. Okay, how could he get these wounds if he was not the one who had been crucified, but somebody else? It doesn't make sense. Also, his brothers became a Christian. Yeah, surely his brothers would know if they had another brother. Like, I have two brothers. I know I have two brothers. Particularly, I can see them. You know, if I had a twin, like Andrew has a twin sister, I'm sure if he had his mum and dad would know that they'd had two children. Okay, the twin theory just doesn't make sense when you add in the fact that his brothers became Christians. Then there's the mass hallucination theory. That explains point 3, the independent appearances of Jesus. Maybe they just hallucinated it. Maybe there was a mass hallucination. The problem with that theory is there is no such thing as a mass hallucination. People have been studying hallucinations in the medical field for years. And you can give people drugs that cause them to hallucinate. But they all hallucinate different things. They don't all hallucinate the same pink elephant. Okay, in a tutu or whatever. You know, they all hallucinate different things. So they're not all going to hallucinate the same risen Jesus at the same time and on separate occasions as well. Then there's the spiritual resurrection theory. And this is very popular with sort of Jehovah's Witnesses and things like that he came back spiritually but not physically. The problem is that the Jewish word means, for the Jewish word that was used, the word resurrection, it means physical, not spiritual. It's very specific about that. Okay, so spiritual resurrection would not be the same thing as resurrection as the word that is used. Also, the ladies find the tomb empty. The Jewish Talmud records that the body was stolen. So it doesn't line up if it was just a spiritual resurrection, that the ladies would find it empty. Also, there's the physical interaction during the multiple independent appearances of Jesus alive after his death. This is why I think the eating is so important. Jesus physically took something and ate it. A spiritual resurrection, that wouldn't happen. Then there is the wrong tomb theory. You know, they just walked past 16 armed men, a big rock with a seal on it, and walked to the wrong one and found an angel who happened to also be in the wrong tomb. Now, maybe if my dad was doing the directions, that could be possible, but it was ladies doing the directions, and ladies always find their way because they stop and ask for directions. Okay? It was a recorded tomb. It was Joseph of Arimathea's brand new tomb. He was a rich guy in a garden with a bunch of Romans sitting outside of it. I'm sorry, wrong tomb doesn't line up. It doesn't line up with uncontroversial fact 2, 3, 4, or 5. And the body of Jesus would then be produced by the Jewish leaders to say, here's the evidence that he is still dead. So, wrong tomb, not a good option. Then there is the conspiracy theory. And this is one that a lot of people will pull out. Well, it was a conspiracy theory made up by the Christians to get power. But what power? They got nothing out of this. Christians didn't have power for hundreds of years after the crucifixion, long after all the documents were recorded and set down. What are they gaining from this lie? They're getting misery. They're being sent away from their homes. They're being executed. They're not getting anything. So what is the conspiracy here? It doesn't line up with points 2, 4, or 5. So really the only other option that I can see is that he really did die. He really was buried. And he really did come back from the dead. And if he is really back from the dead, he's the only person to have ever done it. And if he is back from the dead, if he has risen again, it affirms everything that he claimed. Everything that he said is now right. You can take that as a fact. Because nobody else has come back from the dead. Nobody else can say that they have that power. So when he said that he could forgive our sins, he was right. When he claimed to be I am, that title for God, he was right. When he said that no one can come to the Father except through him, he was right. When he called people to repent, he made it a binding requirement on us. He was God in human flesh. He did die to take our place. He did save you from the wrongdoings you have done. You do have to change your mind about who he is, how evil your wrongs actually are. You can go to him and know, not guess, not hope, but know your sins are forgiven. You can trust in him. Now, I would like to challenge anybody listening if they can come up with another theory, a better theory that explains the uncontroversial 5 facts that I've laid out before you. That he did die by crucifixion, that the ladies did find his empty tomb, there were independent appearances of Jesus alive after his death, that there was violence endured by the apostles, that there was enemies of Christ who were converted. If you can find a better explanation for those 5 facts, that he is truly who he said he was, and he did truly rise from the dead, I would love to hear it. But thank you very much for listening. I think I'm almost on time, which is rare. So we'll just commit ourselves to God in prayer. Father, we come before thee and we give thee our thanks that we are not like many other religions that have to take things on blind faith, but we have a hope which is sure and certain. We know, our Father, that thy Son did die for us and that he did rise again on the 3rd and the appointed day. We give thee our thanks, our Father, that we can rest assured knowing our sins are forgiven because of the finished work of Christ upon the cross. We pray, our Father, that everybody who hears what is said really thinks about it and considers it and does not close their mind to the truth of what has been said. We pray these things in thy Son's alone worthy and precious name. Amen.